Okay, welcome everybody to the Atheist Society for our November lecture. The Atheist Society doesn't have any members, but we do have a mailing list. So, and we have a website where we record not only future but past lectures. And today we have the great privilege of welcoming Dr. Vince Giuca, who's going to speak to us on why religions persist. So over to you, Vince.
Thanks, John. All right, look, the question why religion persists has been at the back of my mind for a very long time. I've held particular views about it for quite some time, but I've never put anything down in writing. And although, the whole area of religion is not something I have studied or worked in, so I approach this as an amateur, but I approach it with my social science hat. I have done research in social sciences, so that's where I'm coming from tonight. And when I started looking at this, when I agreed to do why religion persists, I thought that I'd be able to manage it more effectively than has turned out to be the case. And that's why I've got the subtitle there, A Socio-Psychological Perspective, because I had to prune it down to make sense of it. Otherwise, it would have been too great. So that's the angle that I'm going to come at it from today. And once again, I'm not a psychologist. So some of these ideas are ones that I've come across from time to time and I've put down on paper. And basically what I want to do tonight is present and then let's have a discussion. I'm really interested in getting a dialogue going. Religious institutions, they're all over the place. If you go to Europe, you'll go from one church to another. I'm going to Adelaide this coming weekend, and that's also full of churches. So it's all around us, and I'm going to come to the numbers, people that identify themselves with particular churches. But before doing that, just taking a high-level perspective, the institutions are around. They're still fairly dominant in societies all over the world, except for probably some authoritarian countries like China. But essentially, I don't think they're going to go away any day soon. The blurb I wrote for this presentation is here on the screen. And basically what I'm getting at is that, intuitively, and I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but intuitively you'd think that, with the rise of science and technology, you would see the diminution of people's faith. And that's what we're going to sort of look at today. And the framework I want to use is this one here on the screen. What is a state of religious belief in the world today, and we can generalise about beyond today. What's the enduring importance of religious beliefs? Why do they endure? Why are they important? And can rational thought and religious belief coexist? Now, spoiler alert, I'm not going to answer that question. That's going to be up for discussion. I'm not going to say too much about that, but I'd like to hear some thoughts on it. Just starting off with the state of religion in the world. This graphic is a bit difficult to read, the numbers. That's why I blew it up in the middle there. As you can see, Australia is down the bottom. This is showing, it's got the wrong heading here. Fewer countries rather than fewer Europeans say religion is important to them. And in the case of Australia, 69% say that religion is not at all important in their lives. So that's a big number. And of course, most of you will be familiar with the census statistics. The last census had unaffiliated at basically 40% and religiously affiliated at just over that, about 44%. So, and the trend line is going up for the unaffiliated and coming down for the religious. Now, just one thing that we need to do is question whether you can, whether that's going to continue. And it's always hazardous to sort of take something like this and sort of say, yeah, it's going to project into the future. I'm not one that believes that just because something's happened or happening in the past, that it's necessarily going to continue into the future. History doesn't work that way. And there's evidence to suggest that things can get in the way. We thought, for example, that communism in Eastern European countries was going to diminish religion, but religion has come back in Russia, for example, where it's now being pushed by Putin. So we've got to be careful of how these are interpreted, and you can't sort of just extrapolate and say that it's going to continue on. But the trend is certainly there. World religions, as you can see from this graphic, Christians is the largest group with 2.3 billion people, followed by Muslims. But if you look at the right-hand side, you can see that the two largest growing groups are Muslims and the religiously unaffiliated. So that's also worth bearing in mind. And people without religious affiliation worldwide represent 24.2%. So in this publication, the Pew Research, they call those people as nuns, N-O-N-E-S. So that and the Muslims are the fastest growing categories. And what I found really interesting was this next slide, which once again, you can't read the small print, but what it's basically saying in terms of Australia is that it's showing nuns are less likely than religiously affiliated adults to believe in the afterlife. So in Australia, we've got 29% of religiously unaffiliated that say there is definitely or probably life after death. So there's quite a substantial number that believe in superstitious beliefs of some sort. And of these, 18% believe in God. So you can't sort of just say that because they're non-believers that they've got no other baggage associated with that. So that's the state of play. And now what I want to do is move on. And look, if you've got any questions about what's in the presentation material that needs clarification, please jump in, including those online. But otherwise, let's leave the discussion towards the end. The enduring importance of religion, looking at it from a psychological needs perspective, I've been able to narrow it down to six items. Now, this is not comprehensive by any means, and there's a bit of overlap, but it's my attempt at trying to sort of identify some of the factors involved. So why religion persists, I'm going to look through these lenses. Explaining the unexplainable, purpose and meaning, sense of belonging, a believing brain, cognitive biases, cultural transmission. These are the things that I would argue helps religion persist from a psychological perspective. For the mind of man is far from the nature of a clear and equal glass, wherein the beams of things should reflect according to their true incident. Nah, it is rather like an enchanted glass full of superstition and imposture, if it be not delivered and reduced. So basically, it's saying, when you look at things, we often there's things getting in the way, and very often things are full of superstition, and it's very hard to break out of that. But you've got to basically take a critical approach and open that up for discussion. And Neil Ferguson takes a sort of a slightly different approach. He's looking at doom, is what his book is called in this particular case. And he's looking at things like disasters, are they predictable? And he's saying in pre-literate societies, life was dominated by the effects of natural forces, only some of which, notably the seasons, were rhythmic and predictable. Disasters were intelligible only with reference to supernatural forces. In polytheistic religions, the gods were often merely the names given to conflicting natural forces. So in pre-literate societies, there was a lot of superstition and, things that happen were the responsibility of particular gods. So they wanted to reduce the uncertain to some certainty. So explaining the unexplainable. Levy here asks the question, did our ancestors form religion and conceive of gods and the spirits to explain signs they did not understand? And that's where I'm coming from. I'm saying, yes, they did. Religion fits our evolving psychology, particularly in helping us understand our place in an uncertain world. So that's where it's basically come from. So that was the first point of the how many 6 points that I had. This is the second point about purpose and meaning in life. And Viktor Frankl, I don't know if you've come across him. I read his little book, Man in Search of Meaning, I think it's called, a long time ago. And Victor was in a concentration camp, I can't remember which one, during the Nazi period. And he saw a lot of his fellow people that were imprisoned with him just die off because they gave up will to live. And what came across for me, and I still remember this, is that he had a will to live and he created a purpose. And one of which was that he had written a manual for psychotherapy. He ended up calling it logotherapy. And he hid it in his clothing, but when he had to strip off, the Nazis took the book away. It fell out. And his purpose in life was to recreate that book, and that's what kept him alive. Also, the love of his wife, because he hadn't seen her, he didn't know whether she was still alive. So that was in the background there. And human dignity and courage. And he sort of described, the appalling state of the concentration camps and how some people just gave up. And he said, he tried to convince people that they had to hang on to their dignity. So just a short passage here I'll read from his book. The experiences of camp life, that's concentration camp life, show that man does have a choice of action. So this is where I'm coming from, that he created the choice to continue, and he gave reasons for that. Even though he was a Jew, and he was practicing Jew at the time. But what I'm saying is it was within his powers, within his choice to make. And I think he's also identified as an existentialist because of that sense. So I'll continue. There were enough examples, often of heroic nature, which proved that apathy could be overcome, irritability suppressed. Man can preserve a vestige of spiritual freedom, of independence of mind, even in such terrible conditions of psychic and physical stress. So you can overcome that, through having a purpose and meaning in life. Now, I'm going to question whether we do need a purpose and whether we do need meaning in life, but that'll come later. Other authors that I looked at, other researchers, Bering looked at belief in God stems from our evolved theory of mind, which leads us to see purpose and intention behind life events. So basically he's saying, we as humans are human because we project purpose and intention on other human beings. And that can get us into a lot of trouble, but that's the nature of human beings, that they can project and come up with what the intention of other people's are, that animals don't necessarily have that intuition. And Charles Taylor explores how even in a secular society, people continue to search for moral and existential significance once provided by religion. And basically, I think that ties in with the stats that I showed before, that, even though there's people who are unaffiliated to a religion, they still some still believe in an afterlife and other superstitious things. So, religion providing some sort of meaning in life, that's another factor. And a sense of belonging. So this is more of the social aspect. Religion is not just about belief, but, particularly the well-established religions have got social institutions that bind communities together through shared values, traditions, moral codes, etc. And religious organisations still continue to play a big role with, I don't know, call it extra religious activities, getting into charities, education, social justice movements. So they're doing more than just preaching to their flock. They're getting into these other areas that provide valuable services to communities. And and religious identity is intertwined with cultural heritage and collective memory. So it's not just a way of, it's not just about faith. There's more to it. So that's, I think, the third one. And then we've got the believing brain. Shermer here has written a whole book on this. It naturally detects, the brain naturally detects patterns and infers agency, even when none exists. We evolved to over-detect patterns and agents, leading naturally to beliefs in God, spirits, and purposeful forces. So, we, as a species, we evolved to, if we heard some noise in a bush, we would automatically think there was a snake there or a tiger or whatever, because that was the safest thing to do. So we sort of jump to conclusions, and sometimes these are erroneous, particularly in our society. And once we form beliefs, which are based on emotions, intuitions, social influences, the brain then looks for confirming evidence. And that's one of the key cognitive bias, and in this case, It's called confirmation bias. So you go out looking for things that will confirm your beliefs. And that can lead, I ran a session on this. Cognitive biases can lead you astray. Basically, cognitive biases are about shortcuts. You make a mental shortcut based on habit or emotion or intuition. The snake in the grass. It's better to be safe than sorry. So in most cases, it works perfectly well, but in other cases, it doesn't. It leads to making bad judgment and bad decisions. So the believing brain, we naturally believe a lot of things that we're told. Even if you're aware that you should guard against it, a lot of people still fall into the trap. I guess scams is a great example of where people know that there's scammers around, but they still end up pressing the button when they get an email and it says, your inheritance is here, or you can make lots of money or whatever. Click this button, and a lot of people do, or some do. So cognitive biases for belief in God. There's with cognitive biases, our natural tendency is to find patterns and agency. The human mind gravitates towards religious belief if you're being preached at, and I've also, I guess, another thing that I've been aware of is that some people who were atheists or agnostic in their lives, end up converting towards the end. When they think that they may need a God. Bill Hayden comes to mind. And then, we've got more researchers who did a study on cognitive tendencies, and I always get anthropomorphism, find it hard to say. Anyway, look, I won't harp on that. That first one, we don't have to worry because they found no relationship. But the mind-body dualism, they found that there was a strong connection between that and the belief in God. That before you can start believing in God, you've got to think that there's a separation between the physical brain and the mind, which might contain the soul. So you've got to make that connection, that you've got to understand that concept and believe in that concept before you can take the other leap in towards believing in God. And they found that relationship was in one direction. It didn't go back the other way. So it was only from believing in the mind-body dualism that comes first, and then belief in God follows. Without it, you may not believe in God. And teleological thinking, which is there's a purpose here. So that's also was present in the belief in God, but it was weak. So, look, I haven't had time. I do intend to get into more detail on some of these because some of these research papers are, you've got to go into the data and look at how they've done it before you can sort of make an evaluation, a good evaluation. So I need to sort of look at that in more detail. But there is, there's social scientific evidence to suggest that there are connections between things that, between cognitive biases and belief in God. It doesn't just sort of happen in a vacuum. And cultural transmission. Religious beliefs are part of, they're partly influenced by cultural learning that is growing up with religion in your family, in your community. That increases the prevalence of you becoming a believer and also becoming a believer in a particular religion. And it explains the psychological impacts of these beliefs. And greater exposure to religious attendance, for example, predicts more belief in God. So physically going to a church means that you're going to have a stronger belief in God. And, we've got to keep in mind that religion over the years, and it's been a very long period, has shown a capacity to evolve and adapt and reinterpret doctrine. And, some of the religions are embracing some of the new social movements, climate change, social equality, technological issues. And, this flexibility shows that religion can or may remain relevant in even the secular age, because they do keep on changing. It's not static. Religion's benefits, and I think, if we're tackling this from a social scientific perspective, you've got to look at the pluses and the minuses, and there are benefits that religion brings. And, psychology, neuroscience suggests, there's studies showing that religious belief can foster resilience, well-being, emotional stability. And religious rituals can create a sense of order and predictability. And you often come across people who may say, look, I'm not a practicing Jew, but, I go along to family events, family religious events, because that's the way I was brought up and it makes me feel comfortable and I enjoy it, but I'm not a practicing Jew. I hear that a lot. The sense of order and predictability, stability sort of comes across quite strongly. And prayer and meditation now recognised as having measurable benefits to health. But also, on the other hand, religion has created a lot of harms, particularly when you look at conflict. It's still going on today. It's not necessarily driven by religious, some of the writers in the area of war and conflict will basically say that, religion is usually not the main driver. It contributes and it makes things much more difficult. I was in Croatia and went and visited Bosnia as well, and that's a real sort of mess. And it's still, although there's peace today, it could still blow up into another war quite easily because of the tensions that exist even today. Even though the war was fought in the 1990s, the hostility you can still sense, and there's buildings around it. You can see bullet holes in them still. But there you've got a mixture of different religions, different ethnic groups, different languages, and it all sort of is poured into this melting pot that can create a huge problem. And also, and Les, this is your bailiwick, psychological damage to individuals and minority groups who do not conform or who want to leave. So Les runs the ex-religious support network, and there's evidence there that there's damage being caused these areas. And this is not comprehensive. I don't want to go on and on about it, but I think it's worthwhile recognising that there are benefits, but there's harms. And finally, I come to this question, rationality versus religious thoughts. And you often hear the idea that rational thought helps us understand how the world works, while religion addresses why it matters. And that religion answers questions like purpose, morality, mortality. And during times of uncertainty, loss or existential questioning, religion offers a framework of purpose, belonging, hope. And some will point out, even in secular contexts, people seek rituals, as we've discussed, narratives that give cohesion to life. But, the question I would ask is that so? And, is it as black and white as that? And what some of the proponents here would argue that religious addresses may not necessarily have to be done by religion, but there's other groups that could do it. So religion, to sum up, religion persists because it fulfills dimensions of human experience that pure rationality cannot, or so it seems. Our need for meaning, belonging, perhaps transience, appear to be met by religion, but doesn't need to be met by religion. Are there alternatives like humanism? Do we as individuals need to have a purpose in life? I certainly don't think that we need a purpose brought down upon us from above or from any other authority. But do we have to have an overall purpose? Or do we have many purposes, depending on the role that you play, at work, at home? How do we find meaning? And is it a necessary element to have a happy life, to establish meaning? Now, some people need it, but I'm just saying, do we all need to have a meaningful life? That's a question that I'd like to pose for discussion. So that's about it from me, but I'd like to open it up to the floor and over the internet if people have got questions.
Well, before we hand over to questions, I'd just like to remind you that we're very grateful to the Unitarians for use of their hall. And if you do have any contribution to make, we'll be able to find something to pass around where you can donate your collection. Apart from that, I just want to note any other upcoming events that might be happening. I'm not sure if the humanists have got any lectures coming up.
Sea of Faith.
Sea of Faith?
Yes, third Thursday each month, so the Thursday immediately after this one, it's 7:15 in the evening. And if anybody wants to know more about it, they can give you their email and I'll send them out a notice. Next week I'll be talking on inerrancy in the Bible, which which side you're going to take. A lot of the Christians believe the Bible is inerrant, doesn't have a single error in it, which is a fascinating concept of it. I, of course, am the other persuasion, the world's full of error. Thank you.
The other regular meeting that happens is that I'm aware of is the skeptics have their meeting and lecture on, I think it's the third Monday of the month in the Stolberg Hotel. So should be coming up soon. I haven't seen the notice yet, but they definitely have a Skeptics Cafe. Well, I think yes, Jenny.
We've got the Humanist Melbourne meeting this Sunday, and the talk is on education and artificial intelligence. We meet every third Sunday of the month in Canterbury, generally, on the whole.
Good, thanks for that. Just another reminder about a regular pub night we have on the first Friday of the month at the Elsternwick Hotel. Is the Atheist pub night, and 2 weeks later we have the Humanist pub night at the same place and pretty much the same people. So anyone's welcome to attend those. So there's plenty of things that you can attend. All right, okay, back to questions. Stephen?
I'd have to point out there's also the other sides connected to that word, which is significance. So can you say that the human creatures can go through life without any sorts of significance if they don't require meaning. But I'll say meaning and significance goes hand in hand. And for example, the faith, I don't like the word religion, the faiths extol a narrative. Of course, that's a problem for rationalism, isn't it? Rationalism has no narrative.
Yeah, look, I'll take it on board. I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm just concerned. I guess there is a hesitancy there because I'm not convinced that we need. I think a lot of the literature on meaning in life to me seems to be overblown, and there's nothing wrong with someone creating their own meaning around the things that they do, and it's not just one thing, but it's multiple things. Like I said, you may have a particular purpose or meaning in a particular role, like work, in your community, in your home life. Some people want that overall purpose. They fight for a particular cause, and that gives them the inspiration to keep on going. That's fine as well. But what I'm saying is there isn't just one way that fits everyone, is suitable for everyone. I think you create your own meaning, whether it's small things or large things.
But why do people need meaning? What do you think? Why do people need meaning?
Yeah, I'm asking the same question. Viktor Frankl needed meaning in the concentration camp to survive, and that was his way of surviving. Yeah, I guess it was more purpose, but he created a meaning around it. The purpose was to recreate, his book that was destroyed, which he did do after he got out. And the meaning, I guess, around that was that, he was creating a breakthrough theory and applying it for the betterment of humanity. We can argue about words, whether it's meaning or purpose. I don't want to get into a linguistic debate. But I guess all I'm saying is, you don't need one big goal. It's you can break it up, and different people will respond differently. John?
Yeah, I've got a comment really, a couple of comments. One is the main reason that religions persist is the indoctrinating of children in schools or by their families. Like they're not given a choice to say, okay, it's up to you to make up your own mind and what to believe. Children are invariably told this is what you're going to believe, and it doesn't matter what the religion is. And the churches know this very well, get them when they're early, and especially scare them. Then you get this indelible imprint on the brain when it does tie into the culture as well. But it's definitely something, you did mention it actually part of the lecture, but to me that's the most important reason why religions persist, because if we had a society where children were given that choice, I don't think religions would persist. And I would like you to comment on that.
Yeah, look, I agree with you, and I think I did mention it in passing here, that it comes up through the community, through parents. It's transmitted. I think I've got cultural transmission, and that includes family. That's quite strong. But you can, if you don't have a church, it could be the government. And there's lots of stories about what happened in East Germany before the wall fell down, where children were spying on parents and because they weren't towing the national line. And it's happened in Russia as well. So it's not just the church, but the indoctrination through churches, I think, is strong. It's probably breaking down more now. But my wife tonight disclosed to me that we've got a granddaughter, 5 years old, and she goes to a kindergarten, and she was supposed to perform in a choir. And my wife asked her, how did it go? And she said, no, I didn't go. Why didn't she go? Because it was going to be held in the church next door, and there wasn't any choice. It was you either go to the church or you don't come at all. And she said, and my parents don't like religion. So I didn't go. So I was surprised that, that's happening even now. I guess one reason why I turned against religion was at a very young age, I couldn't understand why I was being brought up as a Catholic. I didn't have a choice. I was being brought up as a Catholic, and I thought, well, if I'd been born somewhere else or overseas somewhere, it would have been completely different.
I had exactly the same transition from religion.
Yeah, it's just amazing. But yeah, the transmission, the cultural transmission is still very strong, and I think that particularly in Europe, where you've got lots of churches, you've got lots of festivals that are Christian, and people take holidays, even though the church attendance is down like here. They've got a lot of tourists that come and provide money to go and see churches. It's embedded in their culture, and I still think that there's some sort of belief in the background. If they were challenged, they'd probably take up the mantra of going to church and going through the ceremonies of getting married in a church and being buried via a church, etc. So it's still part of the culture, and and there's been throughout history it's been like that. When you sort of look at papal history and how it the relationship with kings and it's just full of that symbiotic relationship.
I think there's one of the aspects of belief is the ability of the brain to sort of compartmentalize. So when you talk about rationality and religion, can they coexist? Well, they do coexist because even religious people are rational. They won't pray for their car to get fixed. They'll take it to a mechanic. So, but there's this ability to compartmentalize. And I guess you did mention it in terms of the cognitive bias, which is kind of a similar thing. It's when you see scientists who are very dedicated to the scientific method, but then they're also at the same time can be very religious. So there's a disconnect, but they don't have there must be a cognitive dissonance, but they have the ability to have different parts of the brain where rational thought and non-rational thought can coexist.
I always like to draw the distinction between rational thought and rationalisation. And I think that a lot of people, it could be part of the cognitive dissonance where they try and rationalise something to fit in, to make sure that their thoughts are consistent. and they just use particular ways of thinking to match that. And I probably, that's probably one area that I'd like to do more research in to see, how people, what goes through their thought process to rationalise the two.
I think we might just about wrap it up because we can have more discussion here. But I'd like to thank Vince for giving us a very, very thought-provoking, interesting talk. So thanks, Vince.
Thank you.